Hi, I'm here to talk to you about fully serverless Python and also the secret origins of the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers. So I'm Shai. I'm a developer evangelist at Contentful. I'm really excited because this is actually my first talk that I'm giving as a developer evangelist for Contentful. So hopefully it's entertaining, and if it's bad, you can all come throw oranges and tomatoes at me afterwards. So cool. So how many people here have heard of the Power Rangers? I'm seeing a lot of hands, right? So what if I told you that the Power Rangers aren't all that they seem? There's a TV show in Japan that aired in the 90s that I want to show you a clip of. So here we go. They're transforming, and there we go. So does that look familiar to anyone? Yeah, I'm getting a lot of nods. So what actually happened is in the 90s, there was this show in Japan called Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger. It aired on Japanese television from 1992 until 1993. There was a producer who happened to be in Japan at the time, Haim Saban, who saw this footage and was like, this is awesome. Why don't we license this footage out? So he did. They edited out all of the scenes in Japanese, and really just kept the bits of people in the costumes. They refilmed it in Los Angeles, aired it on American television from 1993 to 1996 as Mighty Morphing Power Rangers. I have a secret obsession with the Japanese version of this show. It's amazing, and I really love the transformation sequences where they, do their little dances and poses and say all their names and then transform into the costumes, martial arts fighters. So much that I actually have a repository on my computer of just these files. Literally all they are is the poses and the transformations, and they're great, and I love them. So since I joined Contentful, I decided, you know what, if I've got to make an awesome onboarding project, let's combine these two passions of mine, Contentful and the original footage of the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers, and let's build a website. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to do this live. So hopefully this turns out pretty well. So Contentful is actually a really awesome system. So as Jason mentioned, it has actually a ton of configurability in terms of like how you set it up and how you set up content. So rather than kind of manually click things through, I'm actually going to go ahead and use our import tools to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and build a new space. So I'm going to call it talk, and I'm going to create it from scratch. So this will take just a second. And then, so I have a Contentful space right here, and it's completely empty. So if we go into it, there's no content or anything. So rather than kind of configure this manually and upload things one at a time, I'm going to use our import tool. So to do that, all I really need is our space ID and then a management API token. Rather than showing you my management API token, I'm actually going to throw that into a JSON file off my screen, just so no one can mess with my account. So I've already gone ahead and pre-configured a JSON file that contains our content model and our content ID. So it's full of stuff. It's actually quite a big file. It has all the videos inside it, so I don't actually need to upload them manually. So to do that, I'm just going to use our export tool. Here we go. Oh, export. Oh. Yeah. Import. Here we go, dash config, and I'm going to go point to my file. And then I'm going to include the content file, dash file, export. So here we go. So it's going to go ahead and upload. The Contentful management API is rate limited a little bit, and so our import and export tool actually takes care of that. So this is going to take just a second. So I'm going to let this run and start actually building our Flask site. So with Python, it's actually pretty easy in terms of dependencies to manage all that. I'm going to build a virtual environment, and then I'm going to install our So I'm going to set up a new virtual environment. And then the only two dependencies I need for this project are Flask itself for the website, and then the Contentful SDK, which is all installable by pip. So this should be pretty fast. And great. So I'm going to go ahead and check on our import. It should be done by now. So if we go ahead and refresh this page, here we go. So here's all of our TV shows right here. And so inside of Flask, we can go ahead and get started with the website. So here we go. So I'm going to cheat and actually just copy in our Flask imports here. So to connect to Contentful, I'm going to need two keys. I'm going to need the space ID key from before, and then I'm also going to need a delivery API key, which will help deliver our content to the application. So to get to that, it's actually pretty easy. So Contentful can manage your API key management, and it'll actually generate one for you, which is really nifty. It makes it really easy to get going with these examples. So I already have one. So here we go. And then here's the other, the delivery token. And so if I was working on this in a preview way, so if I wanted to look at my content that I hadn't published, instead of using this delivery API key, I would actually be able to use this preview key, which would let me look at unpublished content, which is pretty great. So next, I'm going to connect to Contentful using the Contentful client and then our space ID key and our delivery API key. So I'm connected. And then I'm going to declare our Flask app. So app equals Flask __ name _ Here we go. So cool. Let me go ahead and just double check this and make sure it runs without any errors. All right, there is a misspelled client. Let me double check that. And I forgot an equals. Here we go. Cool, so we're connected. So everything's wired up and hooked up without throwing any errors. So the next thing we need to do is actually build our routes. So we have a server, but it's not doing anything. So I'm going to go ahead and set up our routes. For this case, I'm only going to really work on one route. I only need one. I'm just going to go ahead and actually show you all of our shows. But I could use like a slug function and kind of dive into entries and dynamically build pages based on those entries. I'm going to go ahead and skip that just for now for the sake of speed. So I'm going to build this index route, and I'm going to do it for both the dash and for home. Great. So now our route is set up, and then I'm going to use shows. So I'm going to call our shows. I'm going to do that previously used client that I built. And I'm going to use our API to look up all content of type show. So in the example that I set up earlier, it created a content model for the show for me. That content model has a title, it has an air date, and then it actually has an MP4 and a WebM for both versions of of content, just to be kind of more accessible in terms of the web. WebMs, I think, are generally a little bit faster and a little bit easier to upload, but they're not necessarily supported in all systems. So I'm choosing to include both, just for kind of cross-browser support here. So content type equals show. And then I'm going to go ahead and order it by the air date as well. So I can order it based on one of the properties that I've created in the content model. First episode, date. Great. And then I'm going to return a render template. So in Flask, the way it works is you create these templates, and then you can pass data through to those templates to give them kind of more information, and then Flask will generate the HTML for you when the route gets called, which is pretty great. So I'm going to create an index route, or sorry, I'm going to create just a template called index.html, and then all I'm going to do is pass it shows that we called. So there we go. And then I'm also going to run the app, so it'll set up the server for us when I great. And app.run, and I'm going to go ahead and run it in debug mode, just in case there are any typos. It'll be a little easier to find. Great. So the one last thing I need to do before I can run the server is I'm going to create a template folder, or templates folder, plural, and then inside that folder I'm going to create our index.html file. So for that index file, it's actually going to be pretty simple here. I'm just going to do a for loop for each show. So for show in shows, and for and then we care about the show titles, so h1 show.title. The release date, so release date, and then show dot first episode date. Go ahead and save this. And then the actual video itself. It's going to look really ugly at first because there's no CSS involved yet, so I'm going to go ahead and update that just in a second after looking at it. So video source equals HTTPS, and then I'm going to take the show.engine webm.url, which will return the URL. And this is type equals webm. And then also source equals HTTPS. And then the show.mp4, just as a fallback. in case we don't have it, and then I'll set that as type equals video dash MP4. There we go. Close the video. And hopefully this works on my first try. Expected indent. 15. And let me great. Here we go. So it's running. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. It is a bad request. Probably filter. All right. So it looks like I misspelt something. Let me try that again. Entry. Cheat a little bit here, and actually, rather than making you watch me debug it, I'm just going to pull in a version that I know works. So let me check those keys. So this should work. Here we go. And hopefully my HTML is also up to spec. Looks like I misspelt index. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see with the sidebar. Let me just go ahead and fix that as well. And now if I refresh, double check that. There we go. So here we have all of our videos. They're all being pulled in. It looks terrible, but that's because I haven't had a chance to use the CSS. So I'm also going to cheat a little bit here. And I'm just going to pull up a version that I've already pre-wired to Bulma, which is a CSS framework that I actually really like. So there we go. So if we rebuild our app, it should look good. Great. So yeah, now there's some bolding and some other stuff. And so the videos are running. And they're cross-browser compatible. So if we go ahead and go into Safari, it should also work. So this took me like a couple minutes to build, but that's not actually, I think, the exciting part here. So that was a pretty cool Flask app. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually go ahead and deploy it onto AWS Lambda. So I'm really excited by some of the things that are happening in terms of serverless computing these days. And to me, it's got a bunch of really cool benefits. So one of the major things that I think kind of works for me in terms of serverless computing are these like 4 areas. So in serverless, you're not managing kind of the infrastructure beyond the initial setup. So the scaling is entirely down to AWS, and the application actually doesn't exist until you call it, and it only exists for a couple milliseconds that it takes to execute. So essentially, your website has a bunch of really cool benefits. Rather than having a server that's just sitting there and constantly billing you, you only pay for the exact usage that you hit. You don't ever have to worry about scaling. That's something that your serverless architecture, in this case Lambda, is just going to handle for you. You don't have to maintain it. You're never going to have to apply updates to your servers. That's again something that your serverless cluster is going to handle for you. And because the apps are run kind of in these tiny containers, it's really difficult for them to go down. Unless you have an error in your code, there theoretically should be no downtime. The one kind of downside to all of this is that you get a ton of vendor locked in. Once you're stuck on a certain serverless provider, it's really hard to pull it out and switch it to another one. Lambda is set up a certain way that's different from the way that Google has it set up or the way that Azure has it set up. So in this case, it's really cool how Python handles it. There's a few libraries out there that you can use, and you can also actually go straight into the AWS Lambda console and do it manually. I really like this library called Zappa because it's pretty elegant and simple to set up. That's actually something I can also do right here. So for Zappa, all I need to do is install it, which I can do over pip. Great. And then I'm going to call Zappa init, which is going to look for the AWS CLI installed on my machine, which I've already pre-configured beforehand. And it's going to use that to build a S3 bucket, which is going to deploy my code into and then migrate it into Lambda. So it's building a bucket. It's detected the app. It's found it, and then I'm going to go ahead and not deploy it globally because that'll be really expensive, and I don't want to handle that. So, and then all I need to do is to deploy it is type Zappa deploy, and what Zappa is doing here is it's taking a look at my virtual environment. So it's actually really important with this specific Python library that you're using virtual environments. It's going to take a look and see what dependencies do I have. If there's a Lambda specific version of a dependency, it's going to go ahead and actually automatically download that. In this case, it's just going to use the standard Flask and Contentful libraries. But if I'd hook this up to a database, it would go ahead and download the Lambda appropriate version. It's then going to go ahead and upload that package onto S3 and then deploy it into API Gateway, which is going to generate a URL for me. And then that URL is set. And so if I want to update it, all I would ever need to do is call Zappa update dev. And if we click on this, if we copy paste this link and go ahead and go in here, we should get our website. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see with this font size. There we go. So now it's live on the cloud, running right on Lambda. And if I go into my AWS console, it will check it out. And that was pretty quick. That took me maybe a minute or two to get it up there. So I think there's a couple things that we should talk about. We should talk about metrics. So that site has been up there for about a minute, but I have a version of it that's been running for a couple weeks now. And that site has been hooked up to Datadog. I'm a really big fan of Datadog because it lets me kind of track and get a general idea of what's going on. They have a really great Lambda interface, which I really like. And this is actually a publicly available dashboard that you can check out. So one of the major things that pops up to me here is that the app itself actually on average takes less than 100 milliseconds to run this Flask server. Which is pretty cool because the way that Lambda charges you is it actually charges you based on 100 millisecond increments rounded up. it charges you for the exact usage or compute time that you use. The deployment takes a little bit longer. That actually takes around 500, but as it sits there, it'll kind of average out down to that sub 100 millisecond usage. Which is really nice. And then API Gateway also charges you based on usage. And so I can see my rough estimate on usage there, which is pretty low. So this is really cool. It gives me a good sense of how much time I'm using and lets me manage my costs. And so I'm really happy with the performance of this site. It's really great for kind of microservices and stuff like that. I wouldn't pull like a major kind of crazy thing onto Zappa. I think that would be kind of anti-pattern. Typically with Lambda, you want to keep it small and keep it micro. So because the compute time is actually so small at the sub 100 millisecond execution, we qualify for the Lambda free tier here, which basically means that we get 3 million essentially free page views before we owe Amazon a cent for Lambda usage. And then on API Gateway, it's $3.50 for every million page views. Of that, Zappa is actually going to consume about 10,000 of them. So Zappa does this really nice thing where it schedules a CloudWatch event to keep the site warm. With Lambda, if you don't hit the site frequently enough, it'll kind of freeze the service, which will mean it'll take a little longer to get running. So by using this CloudWatch event, we can keep the server warm and make sure that when you go to the link, you'll get a really nifty, fast kind of response time. So overall, I'm actually really happy with this service. I'm really happy with kind of the cost and this way of like building software. And for me, I've gone into it and I've built a kind of extended version on my own time that has a little more features. And so it'll actually dynamically, if I can, there we go. So yeah, I can dynamically click into sites, and this is all generated through the Contentful side, through just adding a new show to their website, and that'll create a new page without me needing to kind of modify anything. So I think this is pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with it, and I hope you give it a try if you're into it. So yeah, that's it from me. I'm Shy, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions.